All right, this lesson is on solving quadratics by doing what's called completing the square. And I'm going to break this lesson down into two parts. So this is the first part. For my students, this is chapter 9, section 5 of their textbook. And in the previous lesson, I showed how to solve quadratics using factoring. So this is another method called completing the square. And the key concept here, and this probably isn't going to make much sense just hearing this or reading it, but when you see it being used, then hopefully it'll make sense to you. The key concept is that you can change the expression x squared plus bx into a perfect square trinomial by adding b over 2 squared to x squared plus bx. This is called completing the square. And again, that probably doesn't make much sense, but hopefully when you see me doing it, then it'll make sense to you. And I got, I think, 4 examples for you today. So let's look at an example. So this is an example of solving one that's set up as x squared plus bx equals c. All right, so we see x squared plus 6x equals 216. And the instructions are to solve the equation by completing the square. So the first thing I want to do is figure out what that b over 2 squared is. And I'm going to do that on all of the problems today. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what b over 2 squared is equal to. So again, this is my a value is here, right? This is my b value and this is my c value. So the b value is 6. I'm just going to do 6 over 2 squared. So that would be 3 squared, which is 9. So the b value, the value that we're going to use for completing the square is 9. And so what we're going to do with this value now is we're going to add it to both sides of this equation. Remember, you can do whatever you want to an equation and not change the equation, not change its value, as long as you do the same thing to both sides. All right, so we're going to add 9 to both sides of this. So that's going to give me x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 216 plus 9. So again, the 9 came from taking the b value divided by 2 and then squaring it, and that gives me this. Now the whole point of this is what we're about to do. It's called completing the square. So what are 2 factors that multiply to 9 and add to 6? It's 3, positive 3 and positive 3. So you would have x plus 3 times x plus 3. And so we're just going to simply write x plus 3 squared. And then let's go ahead and add the 216 and the 9 together. So again, I found this value by doing the b value divided by 2 squared. That gives me the 9. And then I add that 9 to both sides. And the whole point of that was so that it would give me this. It would give me a perfect square here. All right, and that's why putting that 9 there is called completing the square. So now I have an equation that I want to solve for x. That's the whole point of this, is that we're solving this equation. And so when you have something squared, the way you solve that is by taking the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. All right. The square root of this left side is just x plus 3. The square root of 225 is, don't forget, positive or negative 15. So remember, negative 15 times negative 15 is also 225. So you take the square root, there's actually 2 answers. So now what we're going to do is solve this. So I'm going to say x plus 3 equals positive 15, or x plus 3 equals negative 15. So all I did was break this apart. So this is equal to either positive 15 or negative 15. And then I just solve these two equations. They're just one-step equations. So subtract 3 from both sides. And so my first solution is that x equals 12. Subtract 3 on this one. And my other solution is that x equals negative 18. Now you could check these answers. You could take them and plug them into the original one. And so if you do 12 squared plus 6 times 12, you'll get 216. And likewise, the same thing with negative 18. If you plugged it in, it also works. All right, so let's look at another one. This one's set up the same way, x squared plus bx equals c. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what that b over 2 squared is. Change colors here. So b over 2 squared. And again, we use this to do what's called completing the square. So my b value this time is negative 6. So negative 6 over 2. So that would be negative 3 squared. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. So this is always going to come out positive, right? So if you square something, it will always come out positive. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. And came out to 9 last time too, right? Yeah, it's not always going to come out to 9. I just happen to do 2 examples where it comes out to 9. All right, so let's rewrite this. I'm going to add 9 to both sides. So I have t squared minus 6t plus 9 equals 247 plus 9. And again, this is going to make this always come out to a perfect square here, okay? So 2 numbers that multiply to positive 9 and add to negative 6, that would be negative 3, right? Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. So x minus 3 squared. Notice all we're really doing is taking the square root of this number. That's what's going here. And this sign determines whether this is a minus or this is a plus. So the square root of this gives me that. This symbol gives me that. Sorry, I had to tell my wife and daughter to be quiet. All right, so now we're here. X minus 3 squared equals 256. And so again, to solve this, we're just going to take the square root of both sides. Square root. So the square root of this is just x minus 3. The square root of 256 is positive or negative 16. For my students, feel free to use a calculator with that. That's fine. So now I'm going to write my 2 equations. So my one equation is x minus 3 equals positive 16, or x minus 3 equals negative 16. Again, simple one-step equation, so add 3 to both sides. So my first solution is that x equals 19. Add 3 to both sides here. And my second solution is that x equals negative 13. And so there's my 2 solutions. All right, so let's look at another one. This one's slightly different. So again, these were set up as x squared plus bx equals c. So now we're going to look at a couple examples where it's x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay. Like I said, x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So what we're going to do is we're just simply going to make this look like the previous ones. So I'm going to move the 16 over to the other side by subtracting 16 from both sides. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing that we did on the first 2 problems. So that gives me x squared minus 14x equals negative 16. All right, now I'm going to do b over 2 squared. see what that's equal to. So again, now at this point, it's the exact same thing that we did in the first two examples. So b over 2 squared. So my b value is negative 14. So negative 14 over 2 squared. So that would be negative 7 squared, which is 49. So then we're going to add 49 to both sides of this. So that gives me x squared minus 14x plus 49 equals negative 16 plus 49. All right, so again, we completed the square here. So again, this minus sign is because of this here. And then you just take the square root of 49, which is 7. So negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. Negative 7 plus negative 7 is negative 14. And then that's equal to 33. Forgot to put the square there. All right, so now we're going to take the square root of both sides. So again, this is set up exactly like the first two. The only difference was that first step where I had to move the c value to the other side. So the square root of 33, the instructions for these, if you come out with a decimal, are typically to round your answer to the nearest hundredth. So I've got positive or negative 5 7/74. And again, now I'm going to split this apart into my two equations. So x minus 7 equals 5.74, or x minus 7 equals negative 5.74. Add 7 to both sides, plus 7, plus 7. So my first solution that I get is that x equals 12 7/74, or add 7 over here. So, or x equals 1 2600. All right. So again, same thing as the first two, except for this first step. So if your c value is over on this side, just move it to the right side by either adding or subtracting it. All right, I got one more example. This one a little bit trickier just because it's got some fractions involved in it. So let's start off by, again, the c is over here. We're going to move it to the other side by subtracting it from both sides. So now I have x squared plus 9x equals negative 15. Find out my value. I need to complete the square. So again, that's just b over 2 squared. So my b value is 9. And 2 and squared. And I'm going to leave this as a fraction. It's going to make my life easier. Okay, so leave this as a fraction. So when I square this, you just square the numerator and the denominator. So you end up with 81 fourths. Okay, and now I'm going to add that to both sides. And don't freak out. This I know no one likes working with fractions, but it's not going to be that bad. So plus 81 fourths equals negative 15 plus 81 fourths. All right, so this completed the square over here. So again, all you got to do is, it's a plus sign because of this plus sign here, and then take the square root of 81 fourths, which is 9 halves. And you could FOIL that and check it. It comes out to this, I promise you. And then over here, negative 15 plus 81 fourths. So you need to get a common denominator and make this negative 60 fourths, and then add 81 fourths. If you're lucky, you've got a calculator that will do that for you. But again, I'm going to leave this as a fraction for now. And so this is going to come out to 21/4. All right, and now we're going to take the square root of both sides. Let's use black. All right, take the square root of both sides. So I have x plus 9/2 equals positive or negative. And so for this, what you want to do, especially if your calculator doesn't do fractions, just do 21 divided by 4 and then hit the square root button. And again, just round your answer to the nearest hundredth. And you get positive or negative 2.29, 2 and 29 hundredths. And so now I'm going to split this apart. I'm going to go ahead and change 9/2 to a fraction. I mean, to a decimal. Sorry. Just do 9 divided by 2 and get 4.5. If that was like a really long decimal, then I probably would leave it as a fraction. But since it just comes out to an easy terminating decimal of 4.5, I'm just going to change it to 4.5. So that gives me x plus 4.5 equals 2.29, or x plus 4.5 equals negative 2.29. So again, subtract 4.5 from both sides. So my first solution that I would get is x equals, oh, I didn't write the answer down for this. Well, I gotta do this in my, all right, hold on one second. Let me get my calculator. All right, so I went and got my calculator, and so 2.29 minus 4.5, we get x equals negative 2 and 21 hundredths. So that's our first answer. Over here, we subtract 4.5 from both sides. 5. So on this one, we get x equals negative 6 and 79 hundredths. And there's our two answers. And again, don't forget, you can insert those into the original equation and check them. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. Have a great day. Until next time.